All right, I'm going to have Liam start out with a few announcements, and then I've got a few, and we'll get underway.
Is it working? Yeah, there we go. Just two things. Next week, just one speaker on Tuesday. So that will be due Sunday night for Andrea. And then prototyping is due on the 3rd of October, too. So that's midterm assignment 3. And then other than that, on Thursday, we won't have class. So meet with your squads, take that time to get dialed in for future assignments and just to meet with them and interact for your final too.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize the reason we're having no classes, that is 75 minutes I know you and your team have available to work on the project. And don't forget, for the midterm, you actually have to build something and put it in front of a prospective user and get feedback, so make sure you're having this in mind. I can't just submit something by email. I have to interact with a prospective user. And so that might be 75 minutes to try that then, which will be great. I think Wale is working to do a student speaker panel with our speaker next Tuesday. I'll just reiterate, everybody has 50 points to gain or to earn for engagement. So the speaker coming next week, she thought a panel with students asking her questions would be cool. So Wale is organizing that. Some students have volunteered to introduce some speakers. To get points for that, you actually have to write the introduction and have it approved by your TF. But if you want to do that, you can. And as was gently reminded to me by a young man in the front row, everybody in the front row gets extra points. So there's a book going around for you guys for sitting in front. Most of you are saying that was a seat available. I didn't know, but thank you very much. I'd like to take a moment to point out that Greg sat here. I sat right with the gentleman with the hat. I sat right there next to Paul. And this is where Bill Gates did his talk in the social network. So we were in that room. If you run out and look on the internet, you will easily see it was not filmed in Lowell Hall. It was filmed in a much smaller, less expensive room. So a lot of great history here. Our change to this room is just for today. The president is being inaugurated tomorrow, and they had to set up the room. All right. Without any further ado, today's speaker came last year and gave an amazing talk. And I asked him back, and we were chatting, and I said, look, you could come back and you could do a great talk, but that really wouldn't be innovative, as they say across the pond. And I said, what would be more interesting would be if you came back and were our professor for the day. So I'm going to hand this lecture off to Ken Moore, Chief Innovation Officer at MasterCard and Professor of Innovation for the Day, to lead us in our class. Let's welcome Ken.
Thank you so much, David, for that fantastic introduction, the dodgy Irish accent on the word innovative, and God help you for trusting me with professorial duties in Harvard for the day. I can see your rating just going down. Thank you so much to all of you for attending the class, for giving us, my fantastic panelists, which we'll introduce in a little bit later on, and myself an opportunity to talk to you today. So from all of us, I'm sure, and they'll introduce themselves later, a sincere thank you. Was going to take this in a couple of different ways. I kind of tried to picture if I was sitting in this room, I was sitting in the bleachers or sitting on one of the benches there, what would be in my mind as I kind of think about my future career. And I thought, okay, the fact that I take this class tells me I'm interested in creating something. I'm unlikely to want to go into risk. I'm unlikely to want to go into controls. It's not that those are bad careers, but I suspect you're probably not in this class if that's the direction you wanted to travel. So I thought, okay, probably creative people, aspirational people, want to change something, but where? So I thought about, some of you would probably want to join some of the really big firms that are out there, the big companies, the investment houses, the banks perhaps, the digital giants, companies like MasterCard or fintechs. You'll want to join something existing. So maybe let's talk a little bit about how do you drive creativity and entrepreneurship in the context of a corporate. Others of you have got that idea in the back of your pocket, that the thing that you've been noodling around or other people have been noodling around and they somehow convinced you to be a co-founder with them. And there's probably a few of you in this room that are already playing with that. And I said, okay, Those of you who are wondering, well, what's the journey to actually starting my own thing? What does that look like? How do I know if I'm doing that well? What are the skills that I would need to follow that path? So we structured this session really around those two tracks. What does innovation look like in a big corporate? And what does innovation look like if you're going to set out and do your own thing? So that's the session for the day. I'm going to start off a little bit. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what does innovation mean in MasterCard. I'm going to set the scene for you, then I'm going to ask you one or two questions. I've been told engagement is very important. So, most of you know MasterCard or think you know MasterCard, right? The word card is somewhat misleading, right? We started as a cards company. We were born out of the banks, right? We were a utility that sat behind the banks in the world and we processed payments for them. And we had all the characteristics that you could conceivably expect of a company that looked a little bit like a utility, didn't have to sell, largely was told what it needed to do every single year. But that was 50 years ago. From that time 50 years ago, we've had a journey where we've taken control of our own destiny, we floated, and we started to build businesses that we had to come up with the ideas of. Now, at the start, that was largely around debit cards and credit cards and prepaid. And that's probably what the word card kind of most, when you think of MasterCard, that's the stuff you immediately think of. But if you look at MasterCard today, it's only a small portion of what we do. We have multi-billion-dollar businesses in data, in insights, in personalization, in cybersecurity, in identity. And we have far more rails than just cards. Most of the ACH, so the fast rails that move money between bank accounts, are actually run on MasterCard. Most of the XPays, the Apples and others of the world, when they process payments, those run on MasterCard rails. The point is we're a different company than perhaps you think. And we've had to learn new skills, new ways of working, new behaviors, employ new people, and create new tools to help us go from utility to where we are today. So when you start off in a large corporation and you start to think about entrepreneurship or you start to think about innovation, the word innovation is nebulous, right? So often I see people thinking, particularly in large corporates, because I think people naturally assume a different meaning to the word innovation if you're in the startup world or if you're in a large corporate. In a large corporate, when you say the word innovation, 95% of people think it's about having great ideas. It's about, it's all about ideas, all about ideas. And actually, innovation isn't just about ideas. Of course, it requires ideas, but it's actually all the hard yards to turn an idea into a reality. So when I think about innovation, I talk about something new, anything new that creates value. But in a corporate, in a large corporate, where there are existing businesses that are doing incredibly well, that are producing tremendous amounts of cash, you're also competing with lots of other ideas, and you're competing with all of the products and services that MasterCard already has that are doing well. So you have to think a little bit differently. What does that mean? You've got to be really good at 4 things, right? You've got to figure out where's the world going. Technologies are making things possible tomorrow that weren't possible yesterday. Consumer behaviors are changing in ways that they can't even articulate today. So you can't just ask them. Regulations are changing. Competitive dynamics are changing. But actually, there's so much change out there, you'd drive yourself crazy if you tried to execute on all of it. Also, technologies go through hype cycles, right? Find me the company that's spending billions of dollars on the metaverse today. Ask me 9, 12 months ago what companies were spending millions of dollars on the metaverse. You're going to get a very, very different answer. Technologies go through hype cycles. They go through adoption. So how do you see through that to realize where should you focus your effort? And that's really about spotting signals, trying to figure out where the world is going, where your customers and your prospective customers in the future, where are they going? Based on technology-driven change, changes in their needs, competitive dynamics, regulations, other things. So signal spotting, really, really, really key, because large companies have an arrogance to them, and it's not a good thing. We know it's not a good thing. We believe we know what customers want, but we actually have to have antennae out to the outside world It's why we spend so much time working with fintechs and with venture capitalists who have a lens on the outside world to help us spot signals. We have over 1,500 ideas being progressed in MasterCard as of this morning. 1,500 mini little startups working their way through MasterCard. The vast majority of those will die. It is no different to startup land. So the second skill in a company that you need in a large corporation is fintechs tend to pursue one central idea. They've got a crosshair on one thing. We don't. We have a huge number of ideas out there, and there's impassionate people that are pursuing those ideas. But we don't have enough capital, and frankly, even if we had the capital, it would be a waste of capital to deploy it against that number of ideas. So how do you separate great ideas out from just good ones? Okay? You've got to have a systemic process that removes sentiment, it removes emotion. It looks at total addressable market, it looks at opportunity spaces, it uses data to guide us in our decision making. And then even as we deploy capital, we got to consistently check ourselves to see, should we still deploy capital? So in essence, it's like a venture capital model, but deployed internally against our own suite of startups. The world is moving fast. We got to deliver things well because everybody watches us. The second we announce we're going to do something, there will be a whole bunch of other companies that will immediately race us on that. And you can guess some of their names, right? So we got to deliver them well. What does it mean? Agility, customer centricity, speed, right? We got to get there fast. We got to think about the consumer experience. And we got to make sure that from the time we announce something to the time when we win the market, we compress that as much as possible. And lastly, we are a scale company. We have businesses in 210 countries. The number of times we launch something somewhere, and because it takes us a while to get it somewhere else, somebody else does it in that other country, right? And it happens to us all the time. So scale matters. So when we think about innovation in corporations, and you could replace the name MasterCard with any other company, it's always going to be those four things. How do you signal spots? You learn something your competitors don't. How do you separate great ideas out from just good ones? How do you deliver them well with customer centricity and agility at the heart of it? And how do you scale them as quickly as you can so you win the market? And we do it through a whole ecosystem. It's not one thing. If the company tries to have a little R&D team at the side, or if its incentives and its compensation structures don't work, or if its vision isn't inspiring and forward-looking, the whole thing falls apart. So you have to build what we call a growth operating system. You've got to build a mentality with every single supporting structure that you need to actually enable us to drive growth. And that comes to our vision, to our strategy. If you look at MasterCard's vision today, it says powering economies, empowering people. Doesn't say payments. Right? Building a sustainable world where everyone matters. That's what our vision is. The vision creates the space in which we try to be innovative. It gives us the guardrails, but it also gives us the license and the inspiration to do more than payments. Our strategy translates that into something that's a little bit more actionable. Our brand has evolved because more often than not now, we don't even use the word MasterCard. We just use the two circles. It's kind of an attempt to embody the Nike swoosh, if you want. Maybe flattery is the sincerest compliment we could give to Nike. Our brand is sonic now. We've used music. We've even tried taste and smell, right, for people to recognize our brand. So we have tunes that we embed into music that evoke the name MasterCard. So we've used our brand to extend us into new places. We work in different ways. We've embedded financially into our compensation structures. 50% of how our people get paid is how they work in MasterCard. We call it the MasterCard Way, and what it's about is a set of principles and habits that drive innovation, and we pay our people based on it. So 50% of how they get paid is based on the results they achieve, 50% is how they achieve them. So it drives new behaviors, because if you don't put your money down on it, people don't believe you. It doesn't come across as authentic. We have tons of tools and platforms that help us be more agile. We've invested hugely in cloud services. We've gone to open source where we can. We've been using Gen AI tools for over a year to create efficiencies for us in code development, in writing, in customer interfaces. So always bringing the latest tools in. Regardless of how smart we are, the smartest people always work for somebody else. I think that's a bit of a lesson because we all have egos. I always thought, I'm pretty smart, right? I'm pretty smart. And it was a mentor of mine years ago who said that to me. And he said, if you always believe you're the smartest, you're going to be arrogant. So actually, it's really important that you understand what other smart people are thinking and doing. So we engage heavily in the ecosystem outside of MasterCard to understand how are people trying to transform the world, not just of payments, but of commerce. So we have relationships with vast networks of venture capitalists. We have relationships with incubators and fintech programs right around the world. We have relationships with fintechs right around the world. And we have readied ourselves as an organization to engage with that community. That's everything from technology-driven change like APIs and service-oriented architectures, but it's also business model changes where we make it easier to do business with them. Sometimes we'll put our reputation at risk as we stand in front of one of these smaller companies. And then lastly, you can be as innovative as you want, but we are a B2B2C company or a B2B2B company. We put our products into the world through somebody else. Now that somebody else can be a government, a fintech, it can be a bank, it can be a telco. But all the innovation that we create sits on a shelf unless that middle B can actually get it into the marketplace. So we do a huge amount to convince that middle B on the value of the products and services that we're creating, but also to make it as easy as possible for them to put it into the marketplace. So that's our growth operating system in very brief. We measure it. To our board, we tell them, here's the projected value of all the new products and services that we believe we will create in the next 5 years. That's a scary thing to do when you're a corporate, because you're educating the market on where you believe you will be from a revenue perspective, and guess what? They'll hold you to it. So it's a very scary thing to do. But again, by having conviction on that, it forces you to execute. So I mentioned that actually startups are hugely important to us. We started, and Sabrina will probably build on this point when we come to the panel right after this slide here. But 7 years ago, 8 years ago, we started StartPath, which was an engagement program where we reached out across more than 45 countries around the world to understand what were interesting small companies doing. And at the time, we were really looking at very, very early stage companies. Right? We're trying to find smart people doing smart things around the world. We need to know that. We think that's really important. And as we did it, we said that's really important for us. And then all of our network of merchants, all of our network of, so we've got about 4 billion accounts out in the world. We've got about about 110 million merchants. We've got about 25,000 financial institutions, and we've got over 100 governments, all on our network. Our network said, God, you guys are getting some great insights here. We want to know too. We also want to know. We see locally. So maybe we see the companies that are really smart that are around where we're based. But we're based here in Massachusetts. No idea what's happening in Singapore. Don't know what's happening in Israel. What's happening in Nigeria? How do we know we're really getting the greatest startups in the world and linking them to us? So we created StartPath for that purpose. And then we evolved it from a focus solely on early stage startups into later stage startups that we could scale around the world. And Sabrina in the panel, I'm sure, will touch on that briefly, but only briefly in the context of this lecture. So I'm going to stop on that one there. I'm going to invite my panelists to up to the thing. I want to give them a very, very warm welcome. These are incredible people driving incredible businesses. There's some fabulous stories of how they got to take, well, these virtual chairs here that they sit in their respective companies today. There's a couple of alumni from Harvard in the room. I'm sure they will share that part of their story as well. They've each taken different journeys to get here, but I think all of the journeys are incredible. So I'm going to hand across to Sabrina and to her fabulous panel, who I want to thank so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ken, and hello, everybody. It's such an honor to be here. I think I'll sit in this one all the way over here. Yep. Thank you, Ken, and welcome to the panel section of today's class. It's really an honor to be here with two Harvard alums, as well as some of the most prolific investors, entrepreneurs, and vets in the industry. So thank you for your time and your attention. Ken talked a bit about my team, which is really running a startup engagement program at MasterCard, which allows us to partner with some of the most cutting-edge, innovative fintechs in the world and help them scale their businesses by providing them bespoke and curated access to our network. This means our technology set, which is an engineering marvel, as Ken mentioned, right? This means our people, our expertise, and access to the mentorship that they need to actually build strong, resilient businesses that can scale globally. But it also means funding. So we do have a venture arm that allows us to deploy capital into the businesses that we have conviction are going to change the world. And so we talked a little bit about career, and I think this conversation will be partially about our journeys and how we got into the startup ecosystem, but then also about some of the tangible actions that you need to take to be a great entrepreneur or a great investor. Me personally, I've grown up at MasterCard, mostly in the product space though. I wanted to be a product manager from the first day that I joined the company, and I was successful in that. I helped launch Apple Pay. I helped launch some of the alternative rails that Ken mentioned. I worked in the innovation team for a while. But it got to a point, I was working on a product, which I won't name at the moment, but I found a really big gap in the network. I was doing some standardization work across companies that should not be named, and I understood that MasterCard had a little bit of something that we needed to fix. And so I went to our engineering teams, I went to ONT, and I said, we need to fix this, otherwise we're gonna be non-competitive. And they said, yes, you're right, this is a great big problem. 3 years and $10 million. And I lost it. I was not gonna do this job for another 3 years, but also it was a light bulb moment for me in my career and also as a person, because if this is the pace at which a large organization moves, we're never going to make sure that we're building the fastest to market thing. And so I ended up then moving to the startup engagement team because MasterCard had this capability to partner with organizations that can help us be more innovative, move faster, help us scale technologies and products that are ancillary to our business, but we can't be building or probably shouldn't be building ourselves. And that's what I've been doing for the last few years now. So with no further ado from me, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce this phenomenal panel. I actually won't do any of you justice in your career journeys, so I'm going to pass the mic. And Rob, will you kick us off? Just tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about how you got into AmFam, where you are now, and yeah, any fun facts you have too. Oh, never let it go.
Hi, my name is Rob Kornblum. Thank you so much for having me. I am a venture capitalist with an organization called American Family Insurance, which is a large Midwestern insurance company, Fortune 250. 5 years ago, AmFam decided to start a social impact venture capital fund. So basically an adjunct to the philanthropy that AmFam had done in our communities. Our mission is to invest in high growth startups that close equity gaps in America. I spend the bulk of my time focused on what we call economic opportunity for all, which is a mix of workforce development. How do we help low and moderate income workers improve their skills and improve their wages and wealth, and fintech. So how can we make the financial system more inclusive for everyone? As you guys probably are aware, there's a pretty substantial both wealth and income gap in the U.S., and we're hoping that our startups can address that. Just quickly, my background is a mix of entrepreneurship and venture capital. I started my career as an investment banker, working with high-growth startups, went to business school, got into venture capital, had never really had what I'll call a real job, and so decided I didn't want to be a VC when I grew up, and spent the next almost 20 years building companies, some public companies, lots of venture-backed and smaller companies, and then had this opportunity 4 years ago to combine the venture and startup stuff that I knew with the philanthropic stuff that I was really passionate about, and I can't believe I get to do this every day. So I consider myself super lucky, and as it turns out, have co-invested with Oliver's team a couple of times, and with a couple of these folks as well. So I'll pass the mic, but that's my background.
Sure, thanks. Introducing Oliver Libby of Hati Memos Libby.
Yes. Hey, everyone. I'm Oliver Libby. I'm also Harvard 03, Kirkland House. I got my entrepreneurship start here at Harvard by founding an a cappella group called the Low Keys. I don't know if that's still a thing here. But yeah, all right, there we go. I run a firm now called HL Ventures. We're kind of a company building shop. So we have a venture studio, an opportunity fund. And for us, there's two hallmarks that define us. Number one is we build companies at the nexus of growth, impact, and diversity. So it's got to be high growth and venture backable and make money. But it's got to be positive impact for people or the planet or both. And 92 cents on the dollar have gone into the hands of underrepresented founders. We've been doing this for 16 years. I also founded a nonprofit called the Resolution Project with my roommates from Harvard. We're now in 126 countries as the largest entrepreneurship accelerator for student social entrepreneurs in the world. So if you have a social enterprise, we run competitions all around the world. And we've backed about 700 entrepreneurs, $9 billion in market cap with less than $10 million in grant funding. I started my career in another sector. I was in the intelligence community in the US in the national security world, and then came into venture, and in I'm sure ways that we'll talk about later today, was very skeptical of venture capital. And so I created a firm that I thought answered some of the inefficiencies, and I'm delighted to be here today with some terrific people on this panel.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Sabrina, for having all of us here. This is very exciting. My name is Sandhya Murali. I'm co-founder and COO at Solstice. We are a community solar platform that's working to get people who can't install rooftop solar on their panels. Only about 1 in 5 households in America can. So we're working to get people connected to community solar gardens. We partner with large solar companies, solar developers that own that own these large solar farms, and we handle all the customer-facing work of finding people to sign up, working with communities to get their residents to sign up, working with large employers to get their employees to sign up, and then we have a software platform to manage the ongoing customer experience. So we're kind of the customer-facing side of the community solar industry, and we're really, from our kind of founding days, we're really have been committed and invested to ensuring that clean energy, community solar specifically, but clean energy more broadly, is made accessible to all communities, specifically under-resourced communities, low, moderate income households, people who rent, people who've traditionally been locked out of clean energy access. So I've been doing that. We started the organization in 2015. As 2 days ago was our 1-year anniversary of selling our company. We closed that acquisition last year. And so we were very generously supported, invested in by both of these two gentlemen right here. So it's great being on a panel with you guys now from the other side. They've been incredible supporters. So happy to talk more about that. And then just briefly, my background, I started my career in banking. So I like to call myself a recovering banker. But I did that and then moved up here for business school. And that's when I met my co-founder. And we started Solstice.
Awesome. I'm Lars Albright, and it's, I guess for the purposes of this panel, I'm a double alum. So I was also a Harvard undergrad, lived in Kirkland House, and then I am a former MasterCard employee. I sold my last business to MasterCard about 4 years ago, so it's really fun to be here on both those fronts. And my background is pretty much always as a founder. So I'm a repeat founder. I built multiple B2B software platforms. Really from day zero, scaling them and selling them. And then, as I mentioned, sold my last business SessionM to MasterCard in 2019 and spent a couple years there on the executive team in the data and services group. And then coming out of MasterCard, I was thinking about what I wanted to do and did I want to get back into starting a company, but I decided that it'd be fun to invest. And I'm now part of a firm called Unusual Ventures, started by another Harvard alum. We're based out in Menlo Park, but I run an office here in Boston, and our focus is on really, hence sort of the name, is to provide an unusual level of support to early stage founders. So we are a seed stage fund. We invest early, everywhere from idea through to Series A, and we try to back founders that are really excited to learn and want to take advantage of our platform. So that's what I do today. So kind of the classic founder turned VC story.
And Lars, maybe I'll stay with you for a second on that, because you are a multiple-time entrepreneur, sold companies to Apple, to MasterCard, and others. Let's start at the beginning of what it takes to found a company, to really be an entrepreneur. So what are some of the challenges that you faced as you thought about building your business, finding a co-founder, hiring your first person, bringing a product to market? Tell us a little bit about some of the anecdotes that you have about what it took to really build these companies, or start the companies, I guess.
Yeah, all right, there's a lot there. So I may not cover all that because there's a lot of detail that you could unpack there. But I'd say the starting part is maybe one of the more interesting things. And I think the world has gotten much more efficient in terms of how people can come together and find founders and start companies. So I think that's a great development. But the thing that strikes me is you have to have such a balance between being fiercely optimistic about what you're trying to do, but also pragmatic and seeking a lot of advice to try to figure out, is this something I should be spending my time on? And I think that's one of the things that sticks with me at this stage of my career is you've got to be really selfish with your time. You don't necessarily think about it now sitting where you are, but your time is your greatest asset, and what you decide to spend your time on is really the most important. So it's not, in the early stages, it shouldn't just be about impressing a VC or figuring out if you can get an angel check. It should be about, is this something you want to spend upwards of 10 years on? Because it can take up to 10 years or more to build a really meaningful company. And that's something that maybe I didn't fully appreciate when I was going into it. But I think once you have that balance and you start to really have some conviction that you've got a good idea, then it all comes down to finding the people, the team. And I think that's something where my strategy, there's multiple ways to do it, was always to find people who had complementary skill sets to me. And I've always been someone who loves to work within a team. So I never wanted to just do it on my own. I've always had more fun building something with founders and a founding team. So for me, I tried to find people who are complementary to me, that I had a cultural alignment with, that I could trust. And that was ultimately the most important thing. And then I guess I'll close in this one by saying that everything you do in the journey, it's going to change. You can't be stubborn with anything. You can't say, I have the perfect idea and this is what it's going to be in 5 years. Inevitably, you're going to get feedback and you're going to change and you're going to iterate. And I'd say that the last thing I'd say, which is very core to what we talk about at Unusual, is soliciting feedback that is not biased is one of the greatest assets you have early in starting a company. So often we go call some friends or we get a customer who we know, but really what we try to preach is go out and get 25, 50 conversations with people you don't know and get that raw feedback and then come back and say, is this the place I want to spend my time?
Son, did you want to add anything also as an entrepreneur yourself?
Yeah. I would echo what Lara said about the team. That's kind of the one constant you have. I have a co-founder, and it was really important to, I think, have that support from the very early days, because your solution may change, your go-to-market plan may change, you're going to have ups and downs, probably more downs than you'd like to admit. And the team is the one thing that's constant. So finding those complementary skill sets, as we evolved, I like to say we need to keep hiring people who are smarter than us, that have better solutions than us, because that's what's going to continue to enable us to grow and adapt to whatever market or industry we're in. And I think that's something that we're really proud of that we built over the last 8 years. Is the team is really incredible and able to weather the kind of inevitable ups and downs we've had in the energy industry and solar in particular.
And Rob, maybe I'll pass it to you next to kick off, the alternative perspective, which is the venture capital space, right? So when you're looking to invest in early stage companies that are pre-product, pre-market, what are some of the things that you think about? How do you really diligence an organization before they've gotten to that scale point?
Yeah, actually, I take it from kind of all parts of my career, including actually as a founder. My startup failed, but I still took a lot of lessons from that. And I would say Sandy talked about the downs. I think resilience in founders. What have they been through in their life that leads you to believe that they're going to be resilient and be able to bounce back from some of the lows. I know that with my startup, I would come home from tough days and my wife would just ask, did you move the ball down the field? And I was like, yeah, like maybe an inch. And she goes, that's okay. You didn't move backwards today. So like those kinds of lessons, because it can take years to get products to market and to have them actually be products that customers want, which was part of the issue with my startup. That's okay. These things happen. So resilience, certainly one. I think an openness and a willingness to learn about themselves. What are the things you're good at? What are the things you are not good at? How do you want to fill those gaps? And particularly from a team perspective. And then, I think lastly, being in love with the problem, not the solution. So when you're in love with the problem, you'll go out and talk to 50 customers and make sure that problem that you think they actually have. Because if you come at it from a solution perspective, in all likelihood, your solution isn't, unless you are designing something, for a corporation that it was exactly what you faced. And even if it is, maybe it isn't the same thing that 50 other companies face. I think falling in love with the problem and then you can iterate around the solution. Those are the things that we tend to look for in early stage companies.
Oliver, I don't know if you want to add anything to that question, but I also wanted to ask you something separate, which is you talk a lot about how an investor or venture capitalist should be more than just money. You need to provide a lot of resources to help founders and companies be successful. So comment maybe on what you look for, but then also what does a good VC look like?
Well, so those are actually deeply related for us. So great question. I think for us, whenever you're looking at a system, one of the things that I love to do is try to challenge the orthodoxy. There's always something to learn about a system, and you don't want to be the person who comes in like a wrecking ball, just thinks you know the better way. But normally there's orthodoxies in systems that are worth challenging. And for me, when I came out of the government and started to work with startup friends from Harvard because I had nothing else to do, and those friends turned into like Mark Zuckerberg and Charlie Cheever and Jeff Hammerbacher, I was like, wow, this is really cool. But what is going on with these venture capital firms? Like, why is it that they believe these very strange things about unicorn hunting, and most of their companies will fail and it's cool, and stay hands off because the special unicorn hoodie wearing future billionaires know exactly what they're doing and will check in every quarter at the board meeting? Like that, in my opinion, was silly. And so I thought to myself, like, all right, so if I were to design a venture capital firm, what would I want to look for? And so for all of those of you who are considering founding a company or being involved in startups or innovation, there are knowable things that every investor is going to look for. Team, product, market. What is the addressable market? What are you going to sell your product for? More and more these days, we're even interested in knowing if you'll eventually make money, which is something that for a while didn't seem like a big priority. But those things are table stakes. If you don't have good answers to team, product, and market, then you should be looking for something else to do. The additional overlay that my firm puts in, other than impact and diversity, which I mentioned before, and we test against that, and we measure against that, and also help train our companies on those things going forward once we invest, is our relevance. My team is about 60 people, 55 of whom work with our companies after we make the investment. And Sandy will know, like, we are there to help with business development, with talent, with product, with marketing, with governance, regulatory, anything you could imagine, because to me, it's the height of insanity to think that even the most brilliant, most talented founder comes out the box knowing those things. And if we can help cut those corners, then we should do that. So relevance is one of our biggest criteria. Can we help? If we can't, I don't care how cool the company is, we're not getting involved. The last thing I'll say here is, everyone here in this room, I'm sure, is familiar with the J-curve, the famous up and to the right, the thing that everybody wants their startup to look at. The closer you look at that line, the more jagged it is. Those days that you heard about here from my fellow panelists can be terrible. Even intraday, you can have high highs and really low lows. And the resiliency, the ability to rely on your investors to help you through that is crucial.
It's really helpful. Lars, I'm going to come back to you just on that, right? You've had some really high days because you sold to multiple companies. You don't, even after you've sold and exited a company, though, still, you have to integrate into a large organization. You have to change the way that your team operates. You have to change your culture. I'm sorry, Ken, but feel free to pick on us. give the good and the bad. But what's it like to exit a company and then have to join a large organization that operates very differently than? Because, obviously this is the goal of every startup, right? To exit in some way, whether it's on the public markets or into a larger organization. So that doesn't come without challenges, even though it's a really good thing theoretically. So talk to us a little bit about your experience there.
Yeah, no, happy to. And one thing I would just say to add onto these comments about just the journey is, I think one of the questions asked, and also going back to the startup, your starting point conversation or thoughts of, do you want to start an actual business, is, are you someone who embraces volatility and likes those ups and downs that we talked about? And that's, in some ways, that's a real kind of personality question. There are people who just don't like that. They like to know that if I do X, I'll get Y. And that's very much not what the startup journey is. It's very it's fluid, it moves, it goes up and down. Some days you feel great, some days you feel terrible. So I think that's just something also to ask yourself when you're in that starting point. And then going back to your question about integrating into a larger business, I'd say first off, it is different with each one you go through, and I've gone through a couple. I'll speak more recently to MasterCard. I think what's incredible about MasterCard, and you saw it in some of Ken's slides, is it just is an amazing global organization. And really, it's an amazing global technology organization. And as Ken talked about, it's come so far in terms of what the company covers. But with that, if you're a small company, and when we sold our business, we were about 225 people, and we were coming into this large global entity. And what we needed to remember is it's sort of the inverse of what you might think. You've got to focus and go down to your core before you can actually scale. And I think that's something that is a bit different of a sort of a psychology for a company when you're coming in. You're going from fast growth and trying to grab growth everywhere into a much larger organization that actually wants to pull you into everything, but you may not necessarily be ready for that. So that's something to think about, is what is your core focus? The other thing that I think, going back maybe more foundationally, is cultural alignment is key. So probably the main reason we ultimately ended up getting a deal done is we had a lot of cultural alignment with the leadership at MasterCard. And so the foundation was strong at the start. And if you don't have that, if you go in with an adversarial relationship or you go in not liking the company, those integrations ultimately end up failing. So I think that cultural piece is really important. Focusing on your core so you then can scale to a larger degree is also critical. And then the last thing I'll say is understanding that as much as you might want to say, oh, we're just going to keep our culture, nothing's changed, everything has changed. And so you have to have another, it's also that balance equation of, we have a culture that we want to bring in and we want to help it form maybe and even influence the culture of the larger company in a positive way. But you also have to be mindful that you're in a new company and you have to embrace that. You can't be stubborn and just sort of say, we're only going to do things our way. So I think some of that flexibility and recognizing that a lot has changed is an important part of it as well.
Yeah, and Sanjay, maybe just to build on something that Lars mentioned, which is this cultural alignment with the company that ends up acquiring you. You're a mission-driven company, and so that must have been incredibly important as you thought about this process. So how much did that weigh into your decision to exit and to find the organization that you were going to now become part of?
Yeah. So I think, it's critical. Otherwise, any kind of integration, post-acquisition sort of scenario is not going to work out. I think we had the best of both worlds because we were acquired as a wholly owned subsidiary we were acquired by a subsidiary of Mitsui, a large Japanese conglomerate. And so they have a US or North American subsidiary that's been set up to invest in clean energy businesses in North America. And so they had one company, a solar developer. We were their first real acquisition. So there's now two companies under the portfolio. So Solstice is still it's Solstice Power Technologies LLC. So we're still our own company. We've retained, I think, all aspects of our culture, which has been really great. My co-founder and I, still kind of lead things. We got a CFO out of the transaction, so that was really helpful, and a lot came off of my plate as a result of that. So where things have changed has really been in Steph, my co-founder, and our relationship with our single shareholder now, as opposed to the many investors that we had. And so that has kind of changed the nature of like our day-to-day and how we manage our board and our single shareholder. And that's been a cultural transition that I think we've had to make because Japanese companies are very different and they're very data-oriented, will do very deep, thoughtful analysis on things. And it's kind of counter to how startups function. And even with, as you progress and kind of move from C to Series A and such, you're still like kind of running full steam and like throwing ideas against the wall. And generally you put more rigor around like figuring out what ideas to throw against the wall, but you're still moving really, really quickly and trying to respond to changing, markets and industries. So that's been a big transition for us. The impact side of it, I think, was part of the investment thesis. The industry that we're in, community solar, is from a policy perspective, it is a product that is meant to create more equity in the energy space. And so it is becoming part of new state programs as they come online, as like there are specific mandates or incentives to make sure community solar gets sold to low and moderate income households. And so we're actually really well positioned because we've been thinking about that from day one. And so I think that was part of the kind of investment thesis when they looked into acquiring us. But that is something that, we're not going to change. And in the early days of going out and trying to fundraise, it was not something that really resonated with anyone. And then I think over the years, you have more investors that are now kind of making that just a kind of a part of their screening lens. But it wasn't like that, I think, eight years ago or so when we started to try and get, that initial set of funding.
Interesting. I'm conscious of time, so I want to ask two more questions. So maybe we'll start with Oliver and Rob on this next one. A bit of a change in topic, but I'm sure everybody that studies entrepreneurship has paid attention to the fact that ventures looked very different this year than it has in the prior few, or really ever. Oliver, or Rob, do you want to talk a little bit about what happened this year? What are the impacts of what happened this year, and what are your magic predictions for the future?
Wow. What happened this year? So look, I think here's how I want to think about this. So there's another orthodoxy. You can tell I love this stuff, which is that, entrepreneurs and the innovation sector are, this kind of, pardon my French, but badass, kind of like, we got this covered. We are, we're the elite. We come up with the ideas. We're going to drive change around the world. Everyone's going to follow us. And like, we have this money, and the venture firms and these entrepreneurs have these ideas. And so like, just watch, we're going to solve all the problems. This is not correct, right? I mean, we are the bleeding edge of technology in a lot of ways. We fund that. That's great. That's a really important component of pushing the world forward and solving tough problems. But we are not an island. And it is never more obvious that we are not an island than when the entire world is going through challenges. And those challenges are legion, as you know. You're graduating at a time where there are not just one or two challenges. It's funny, I was at a watering hole in the Harvard Yard with my friends in 2003, and we were like, wow, like, I wonder if the world's going to have like enough stuff for us to, tackle and get involved in. And I should not have wished for that, because now there's real problems, and they're all over the place. It's climate, it's inequity, it's so much more. And so over the last year or so, as I'm sure you followed, the market has been really tough. It's not just the public markets, although they've been tough. It's also just a lot of uncertainty. And in fact, in a lot of ways, it's easier when there's a big crash. Market's down 40%. We're in the middle of a recession. It's terrible. And then a year or two later, it kind of picks back up. Now it's uncertainty, right? And uncertainty is really deadly for startups, because startups live in uncertainty in general. And so what it's meant for us in the startup economy is it's much harder for our startups to raise money. It's much harder for our funds to raise money. And we're like sharks. We have to keep moving, not Shark Tank wise, but we have to keep moving. We have to have assets to invest in startups, and the startups have to raise their next round because they burn capital until they get profitable. And most people weren't talking about profitability for quite a long time in the go-go days of the last 10 years. And so what happens is you push the outcomes out, and there's an effect that I'm calling the barbell effect, which is your best companies right now actually can advance even further. They can acquire other companies that are, that are having trouble. They can move more quickly because they have resources. But the companies that are more troubled in your portfolio, they really need a lot of help. And you can either choose to abandon them, or you can choose to help them through, but it's stressful. And so, yeah, I think the last year has been one of stress. It's been really tough for entrepreneurs. Even the best companies are reducing their forces, are worried about when they're going to raise the next round. And so, again, it comes down to, if you're going to do this, how much can you handle when things don't go according to plan? Because this last year has been things not going according to plan for almost anybody in this sector. And it is very important to realize that we are intertwined with the rest of the world.
You guys have probably already seen this, but Mike Tyson's quote, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. I'm going to date myself. I was a venture capitalist the first time when the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, 2001. And then I was in large companies and startups in 2007, 2008. And so I guess my perspective is that cycles come and cycles go. And so this year has been, as Oliver pointed out, exceptionally difficult for our companies to raise money. And interestingly, it hasn't really hurt, I think, their ability to gain customers. So I don't think we've seen a significant downturn in the economy broadly. Customer growth in many of our companies still remains strong, but financial markets are super choppy, and they have been before, and they will be again. I think we will come out of it, hopefully relatively soon, notwithstanding things like out of our control, like government shutdowns and political turnover next year. But I'm reasonably optimistic for where things go. Hopefully as early as next year, but probably the year after. Because I think again we come out of these cycles. So.
Just one thing that's great for where you guys sit is, I think the people who had it the hardest are founders who started kind of at peak market, and they sort of assume that this journey is one where you come up with an idea, you might not really have tested it, you raise a little bit of angel money, but then you go back 12 months later and raise an up round, maybe a seed, and then maybe another 12 months later you raise an A, sort of regardless of where you are in your progress. That was just the conveyor belt that everyone thought that they were on because the market was so strong. Venture capitalists were looking to put money to work, and it was just this frenzy. You also had the whole phenomenon of just constant Zoom pitches during the pandemic and people deploying. Now, and where you guys sit, if you're thinking of starting a company, it's a great time because you're starting at the base. You're starting at a low. Now, we don't know how long that low is going to last. Could be a year, it could be multiple years, but you have that perspective now. And going back to my earlier comments, you can think really hard, like, is this an idea worth the time? Is this something that withstands the bar being higher right now in terms of raising money for something? And do I really want to do this? And so I think that's just, maybe to put a positive spin on it, it's actually a good time to be where you guys are and to think about, how you might want to build a business in a down market, and that will only get, easier in an up market.
So Lars, if I can come in on that one there. So I'm going to ask the panelists to stay in seat. We will move to questions within the next 5 minutes, so please do get ready with some questions. But I thought it would be really interesting is there's some incredible stories, some incredible journeys here, hopefully that you can relate to. Let's roll you back to when you sat in similar seats to these ones here. What is the one thing that your own journey, your own path in life, that you wish you had known when you sat in those seats there? Any order you want. Yeah. Like, you can tell this is an unscripted session. You can see the fear on all of their faces. You're not off the hook either. I'm coming to you too on this one.
I have like a really tactical one. So I went to, and I'll go back to when I was in business school. I was down the street, but I didn't get involved. Like, we didn't really kick Solstice off until after I graduated. So had I known that this was going to be my path, I would have taken all of the organizational management courses and people management courses, because that's been my greatest learning over the last 8 years. Like, there's been a lot of learning about the industry and the business and kind of figuring out our exact fit, but I think managing a team and how you kind of maintain morale through those downs and also ride those ups. There are a lot of courses that you can sort of take to understand that theory, and I wish I had done some of that when I was actually in business school.
I'd say one thing that's hard to do when you're building businesses is to really live in the moment and not think about the next milestone, the next customer meeting, what are my quarterly results going to be. You get on a bit of this conveyor belt. So I think part of the advice I maybe would have given myself is just embrace the journey, embrace the moment. And even if you are of the personality that enjoys the variability, it's a great ride. It's a great journey. So don't be so focused on the next milestone. Sort of embrace the moment might be one thing I'd share with my younger self.
So I think my biggest learning, and probably the thing I would convey, is that there is no one path. I was a history major in college. Who became an investment banker and spent 30 years working in technology without any technology degree or training, not as an engineer, but sort of in every other role. I think the variability of the path you take is actually an asset. There's a terrific book out called Range, which talks about all the different paths you can undertake and how you can kind of fail up and fail your way into learning what you're really meant to do. And I kind of feel like that's what I've done. So it resonated with me. But just embrace the zigs and the zags, because I think that they'll be there, and if you learn from them and move forward, then you'll find kind of the right spot.
I'll share maybe 3 controversial things.
I love where this is going.
The first thing is I sat in these very seats in this very hall. I loved my classes at Harvard, and the professors are amazing, but the stuff that has stuck with me is the things that happened outside of class. I started organizations here. I got some of that practical knowledge, built the friendships and relationships. I mean, Resolution I still run with my Harvard roommates 20 years later, and it's very successful, and those bonds are part of that. So number one, obviously the classes are amazing and it's one of the great privileges of being here, but do stuff outside, start something, even if it's small. An a cappella group is no great enterprise, but it started to teach me how to, keep people to a schedule, manage a little budget and stuff like that. And you got to get on that. Two other things, I think, one thing that may seem glib, but it's true. Harvard is a powerful calling card in lots of ways. But it also doesn't do everything for you. I joke around, but I think it's a little bit true that what Harvard really does for me in the business context is gives me the first 2 minutes of any conversation where people will assume that I'm smart. I can disprove them quickly, but you get 2 free minutes where people assume you know what you're talking about. Don't waste it. Don't waste it, because I see 3,000 decks a year to do 8 investments. Those 2 minutes are valuable. And last but not least, much of what you do will be with people who are in this room or around you here. There are, and many of the entrepreneurs we've backed didn't go to Harvard. There's amazing talent outside, but there's Harvard people kind of around the entrepreneurship space everywhere. And so, it's never far from this room.
Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to give Ken back the mic.
Perfect. Please stay there, because we will give folks a chance. I don't think it would be fair if I didn't take the same question on myself, and I was kind of scrambling a few times because I was going to give similar answers, so I'm kind of making this up a little bit on the fly. But I heard this once from a coach of mine, said, realize what you're setting out to do. It's much easier to be in the painkiller business than it is to be in the vitamin business. And what he meant by that was, painkillers solve real pain or opportunity for people in the world. There's a materiality to it. Vitamins are elective. You take them today, you forget tomorrow, you don't care. It's really hard to create compelling businesses when you're not really solving somebody's pain. It's elective. They can take it, they can't. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. So really understand what you're solving for, whether you're in a large corporate or whether you're starting your own thing. Are you selling painkillers? Are you selling vitamins? So that would be maybe what I would add to it. So we're right on time. So I wanted to thank my fantastic panelists, to Sabrina, to Oliver. You can guess that the dinner conversation that goes on around there. Sandhya, Rob, and Lars, a sincere thank you to all of them.